The vigilant horizon hung at the Lagrange seam between two blue-white giants. A needle of alloy threaded through a gravity loom. It had been built by the Concord of Minor Worlds for exactly this purpose, to host conversations between factions who would rather shoot than speak. Along its hull, the hospitality lights cycled from Terran spectrum amber to Carvic twilight violet every 8 minutes, a ritual promise that no one culture owned the air inside. Shuttles came in along strictly separated corridors. Carvic craft used ventral approach lanes, skimming the station's radiators like dark beetles. Terran ships docked dorsal, guided by drones that spoke in soft band radio and polite warnings. At the midpoint of Glassy, shielded spindle called the Meridian axis neutral. Drones checked weapons and oaths. Admiral Elias Rourke watched the docking readouts from the Resolutes. Forward bridge and rolled the stiffness out of his shoulders. The crew tried not to stare. It wasn't the scars that drew their eyes, the jagged line from jaw to ear, the healed puncture below his sternum. Everyone in 4th Fleet had those. It was the bundle in his arms, swaddled in impact foam and warmed cloth, that made navigators fumble and gunners look away. The bundle wriggled and made a small, breathy chitter. Rourke lowered the bottle and tested a drop on his wrist, like he'd been taught in a medical crash course 13 hours earlier. To cool, he tucked the bottle back into the thermal sleeve and adjusted the auto warmer 1 notch. Temperature set to 32.4, said Lieutenant Mara Kincaid from his left. She was the bridge's calmest presence, all tidy braids and steady hands. Her voice cracked anyway. "Sir, the station just cleared us for personnel transfer. Ceasefire protocols in effect." "Thank you." Rourke kept his eyes on the bundle. "Remind the Marines, no power packs, melee only, sheathed. Helmets off in the chamber, and no one makes a move if I get yelled at, or shot at, or insulted in creative new dialects, sir." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "Are you certain you wanted to bring them? We could request neutral nursery services from the station." He let the silence hold for a beat. 100 screens reflected across the viewport, red lines of interdiction zones, green blips for allied craft, violet bands indicating Carvic corridors. Beyond it all, one of the blue giants flared with a quiet, indifferent storm. "The point," he said finally, "is to be seen." A soft TCH from behind. Chief of Security Clara Niam stood with hands folded at the small of her back. Her armor's power cell had been removed. The empty slot looked like a missing tooth. "Respectfully, sir, there's seen, and then there's seen with a target painted on your chest." Rourke smiled without humor. "My chest already has a target, Chief, has for 7 years." The bundle kicked. A sliver of scaled limb slid free, curling. Rourke caught it gently with a thumb. The scales were warm, surprisingly soft at this stage. He didn't look up when the forward lift doors whispered open and a station liaison stepped through, with an escort drone the size of a cat. "Admiral." Rourke, the liaison's voice had the careful flatness of a trained mediator. She was short, gray at the temples, wearing the Concord's silver triangle on a simple black coat. "I'm Administrator Salve. On behalf of Vigilant Horizon, welcome under the terms of neutrality. Your counterpart has already arrived, Administrator." Rourke inclined his head. The bundle squirmed and made the faintest squeak, and the liaison cool, seasoned. "Stones in the river," Com blinked. "May I?" She caught herself. "Forgive me. We're prepared to provide. I'll keep them with me." He shifted the warmth closer to his sternum. "Every monitor and recorder will want proof this ceasefire is more than a pause for reloading. Let them have proof." Salve studied him. Not his medals, not his scars. Him. "Very well. I'll document the deviation from usual childcare protocol. This way, Admiral." The escort drone bobbed and rotated toward the lift. Rourke gestured to Kincaid and Niam. A squad of Marines fell in, helmets under their arms, eyes forward and expressions blank with effort. As the lift's doors closed, the noise of 4th Fleet dwindled to a hush of fans and the measured heartbeat of the station. On the ride down the Meridian axis, Salve recited the ceasefire articles in a voice that had carried 1,000 such lists. The words snagged on the same barbs they always did. No forward moves across grid lines. No active targeting locks within 2 light minutes. No psychological operations in shared media bands, but for once the mesh of prohibitions. did not fill him with claustrophobia. He looked down at the small faces peeking from the blanket and counted breaths. "You understand that any breach will be recorded by the Axis," Salve concluded. "Retaliation rights under Concord law remain suspended for the duration of the summit." "I understand." The bottle warmer pulsed ready, and he eased the nipple to a waiting mouth. Tiny jaws latched. Relief hit him with all the gentleness of decompression. Niam watched the feeding for all of 1 second, then pivoted to the administrator. "We'll need environmental tolerances in the chamber. Humidity and trace atmospheric composition. And a clean surface. The chamber is adaptive," Salve said. "Terran and Carvic spectra alternating every 8 minutes, as you saw outside. Make it 4. Rourke said. "Shorter cycles. No one gets comfortable enough to forget where they are." Noted. The lift slowed. The drone chirped. A clean chime announced proximity to the ring of antechambers round the council hall. Rourke felt his pulse pick up, then deliberately slowed it. He'd stood on 100 thresholds that mattered. None of them had involved cradling infants. "They made contact 21 minutes ago," Salve said. Facing the doors, High Strategos Arxith and a war delegation. The Strategos requested traditional Carvic seating arrangements and an honor guard. "We granted both, within limits." "Within limits," Niam repeated, which in Marine dialect meant we can break this room into a puzzle of cover in under a second. The doors parted on a corridor shaped like a ring section, its walls a gradient that eased the human eye toward Carvic wavelengths. The station's air smelled faintly of metal and cinnamon neutrality's attempt at nowhere. A second escort waited there, this one a humanoid drone draped in envoy cloth. It bowed with its shoulders while keeping its face aperture pointed slightly downward. An old gesture meaning "I see, but I do not judge." Someone on the station had read their books. They passed an array of niches where envoys would normally leave their weapons. As signs of good faith, Terran carbines rested next to Carvic vibro hooks, each secured by neutral clamps. Above them, a projection traced the last 7 years in a single looping ribbon, Vera's shattered ring habitat, the burning of the Aegis belt, the Carvic moonside mass graves. When Rourke's image flared at the siege of Proxima Jaw, set like the stone of a memorial, he didn't look away. Neither did Kincaid. Niam's mouth thinned until it was a white line. The bundle finished its measured sips and made a burble that, impossibly, sounded satisfied. Rourke wiped the little mouth with the edge of the cloth. He could feel Kincaid's question hanging back there, unasked now that the lift ride was over. He answered it anyway, softly. "It's not weakness to have hands." "No, sir," Kincaid said. "It's dangerous to be the only one willing to use them like that, in a war of machines." Niam murmured. "A man with hands becomes visible." Salve stopped at a set of tall doors that tapered toward the top like spear points nearly touching. The station had designed them to meet both aesthetic Terran symmetry below, Carvic vertical austerity above, and as always, the compromise looked a little strange and a little beautiful. To neutrality drones hovered to either side, their housings polished within an atom of vanity. "Last checks," Salve said. "Your heart rates are tagged. The Axis will alert medical if anyone's falls outside safe ranges." Rourke snorted. "If that happens, medical will have to get behind my chief of security." Niam offered a ghost of a smile. The Marines rearranged their shoulders, closer now. Not a wall, not a threat, just a weather front moving in the same direction as he did. He shifted the bundle's weight, feeling the way the small bodies adjusted to his. Contour like they were designed for it. Solid. Here. The doors opened. The chamber was big enough to swallow a frigate, bridge, and small enough to force proximity. At its center sat a low, elliptical table that could be raised or lowered depending on the cultural mood. Today, the station had split the difference. Carvic banners hung like obsidian shingles along the far curve, their glyphs flowing in mineral script. On the near curve, Terran service standards rippled in simulated air. High Strategos Arxith stood with his honor guard to the left, a silhouette of dense mass and layered armor plates that looked grown rather than forged. Carvic warriors had the stillness of stone under deep water. Even their eyes moved in increments, not sweeps. Arxith's crest spines were glossy with ceremonial lacquer. He had the bearing of a mountain that had decided to grow teeth, The War Council was there. 2 Terran admirals and civilian overseers who had learned to hold a room with their gaze. Councillor Tinabu, with her tied-flat voice. Admiral Hisong, whose patient strategies had bled 3 Karvik supply lines dry. Cabral of the Fleet Treasury, who wore a smile like a receipt for a heartbeat that stretched. Nothing happened. Rourke felt the station's cycles shift the light. He stepped forward, not fast and not slow, and the air seemed to dip around him as if reconsidering its density. He walked to his place at the table and did not sit. Instead, with a carefulness that felt like diffusing a bomb, he eased the blanket open. The hatchlings blinked at the sudden brightness. Their slit pupils narrowed to fine threads. One yawned, a silent triangle of pink membrane lined with developing bone ridges. Their contextless gazes swept over banners and scars and the sharp geometry of power. They made small, questioning noises. Rourke tilted the bottle again. The War Council froze. He saw the exact moment a dozen calculations died across a dozen faces. The Karvik honor guard's claw fingers flexed and then stilled. The lacquer on Arksith's crest caught the light like a thin blade. Councillor Tinabu forgot to breathe. Hisong's eyes flicked to Niam and then back, as if confirming that this was not a hallucination engineered by an enemy PSYOP. One of the elder Karvik generals, her platework was old and well-kept. Her posture strict enough to serve as a plumb line made a sound from deep in her throat. Involuntary and raw. Rourke didn't speak her language, but grief was universal enough to translate. The Stratigo's gaze snapped to her, and then to him, and something like weather passed over his features. Administrator, Cabral said at last. Politely strangled, this is. Inconsistent with agreed optics. Selva's voice came even. Neutrality does not dictate optics. Arksith took a step forward. The floor did not complain. Admiral Rourke, his Terran was shaped around a larynx built for different air. Vowels tightened as if carried in a fist. Is this mockery? Trophies. Rourke kept his hands steady. No, he said, and for once the word did not feel like a tactic. Its hunger no one moved. Even the station seemed to hold itself a little tighter, as if the bulkheads wanted to eavesdrop more closely. He raised the bottle again, and the small jaw latched, efficiency born of need. The sound it made contentment. Unarmored ran through the chamber like a crack in glass. Rourke let the moment stand. He let them look. He let them decide what they were seeing. Weakness, manipulation, a new kind of battlefield. A man who had won too often and finally broken. He did not tell them the story of the shattered pod drifting on silent thrusters. He did not tell them about the medical bay turned nursery or the way battle-hardened engineers brought scraps of fabric as if the gift mattered more than the giver. That belonged to a different hour. Now belonged to this, the feed, the breath, the impossible ordinariness of a living mouth opening and closing in the space. Where declarations usually lived, a junior Terran officer near the back, young, face like a blade not yet honed, made a small, disbelieving laugh and then smothered it, shame flushing high on their cheeks. On the far side, the Karvik elder took another slow step forward, her honor guard's fingers twitching on instinct before she stilled them with a glance. She looked at the hatchlings as if cataloging scars she had not earned and losses she had. You carry them as your own, Arksith said. The words had lost some of their knife edges. I carry them until someone who loves them can. Rourke said, or until I die, and then my people will carry them. Tinabu found her breath. Admiral, she said, not unkind. We came to talk about grid lines and convoys. We did, he agreed, finally tearing his eyes away from the tiny face at his chest to meet hers. And then Arksith's in turn. And now we will. He eased the bundle into the crook of his arm and, with his free hand, gestured to the table. The station's adaptive surface flowed, spawning a clean panel that warmed to body temperature. He set the hatchlings there for a moment so the bottle could finish its job, without the awkward angle of a single arm. He did it slowly, telegraphing the motion the way you did when handling unexploded ordnance in a crowded room. The Marines did not breathe. The Karvik honor guard shifted their weight almost imperceptibly, a collective instinct to be closer to something that suddenly mattered. Peace begins in moments, Rourke said, not as a flourish, but as a simple fact said aloud so it wouldn't slip away. This is one. He collected the bundle again. The bottle emptied. The chamber's light clicked from Terran amber toward Carvic violet. The pause tightened into what came next, and across to banners and a mountain's worth of history. The first, smallest change had already happened. They had all seen the same thing. The refugee pod had been little more than a cracked egg drifting in the black, discovered by accident as the Resolute crossed the wreck-strewn borders of the Carvic line. It wasn't even on their patrol vector. The ship's sensors had pinged it as debris, one more splinter in a galaxy full of splinters. But the pod's transponder pulsed faintly an SOS signal in archaic Carvic frequency, more a prayer than a beacon. Most officers would have dismissed it as a decoy or trap. War-bred suspicion like rust bred in salt water. Rourke had ordered it hauled aboard anyway. When the pod cracked open in the hangar, the crew expected explosives, nanite spores, or the skeletal remains of some propaganda ploy. What spilled out instead were 6 tiny shapes, barely larger than Terran cats, their scales damp and pliant, their underdeveloped claws clutching at the air in frantic instinct. Their breathing was shallow, their small hearts rattling against rib cages too fragile for war. By the void, someone whispered, even Chief Niam, who had broken necks in the dark and once detonated an escape hatch with her own shoulder, hesitated. "Sir, these are juveniles, hatchlings." Rourke crouched without hesitation. The creature's eyes opened slits of copper, and violet-tanned, one of them made a plaintive keening that cut through the hangar's silence like a blade through silk. He reached out, gently. The smallest of the hatchlings latched onto his thumb with surprising strength, its jaw trembling but determined. Rourke felt the minute pulse beating against his skin. "They're dying," said Kincaid, scanning with a medical reader. "Dehydration, malnutrition. Their life support must have failed days ago. They won't last the night without intervention." The hangar's air thickened with hesitation. Regulations were clear. Enemy civilians were to be turned over to Concord custody. Handling them directly carried risks disease, espionage, political fallout. Yet the crew's gazes kept flicking back to their Admiral, as if waiting for him to be the steel spine of the moment. Rourke looked at the hatchlings and saw not enemies, not symbols, not propaganda. He saw children. "Bring them to medbay," he said, voice level. "Sir, protocol can wait. Life can't." The nursery improvised within hours. Medbay had transformed into something no warship manual had ever anticipated. The sterile white compartments now held makeshift nests fashioned from thermal cloths and impact foam. Engineers modified atmospheric scrubbers to replicate Carvic nursery humidity. Someone hacked a nutrient synthesizer to mimic the protein slurry found in alien incubation sacs. The hatchlings were fragile, yes, but stubborn in their own way. They clung to life with small jaws and weak claws, and their cries strange. Clicking chitter sounds echoed down the corridors. The crew adapted quickly. Hardened gunners brought scrap fabric sewn into soft pouches. Communications officers rerouted lullaby tracks from the ship's cultural databanks into soft ambient hums. Even the most stoic veterans found themselves lingering at the medbay viewport, watching tiny alien bodies curl into warmth. And at the center of it all was Admiral Rourke, the man who had orchestrated the siege of Vera, who had ordered firestorms to rain down on entire cities to break a supply chain, now spent hours in the medbay cradling hatchlings. His scarred hands, once infamous for signing execution orders and fleet maneuvers, now fumbled with bottles filled with protein slurry, testing them on his wrist before feeding. "Admiral, you don't need to be here for this," Niam said once, her voice more gentle than usual. "We can assign nurses, volunteers." "No," Rourke interrupted. He adjusted a hatchling against his chest, rocking with unconscious rhythm. "Orders are easy. This is harder, and it matters more." Niam fell silent. Rumors across the fleet word spread fast. Crews whispered in mess halls, "Did you hear? The Admiral feeds them himself." Some laughed nervously, dismissing it as exaggeration. Others swore they'd seen it with their own eyes. Their Iron Commander, the man nicknamed Gravebuilder, humming low Terran songs while bottle-feeding enemy children. It unsettled them. It softened them, a junior lieutenant confessed to Kincaid one evening. "I dreamed about my brother, ma'am, the one we lost at Proxima. I kept thinking if the Carvic had found him, would they have cared for him like this? Or would they have left him to drift?" Kincaid had no answer, But she saw the same thought ripple through the fleet. Discipline remained sharp, guns polished, ships battle-ready, but something invisible had cracked open. Not weakness, not hesitation. A recognition. The decision to bring them when news of the Ceasefire summit arrived. Rourke made a choice without hesitation. The hatchlings would come. His advisors nearly mutinied. "Sir, you look sentimental. The council will see it as weakness. The carve may accuse us of kidnapping their offspring." Rourke listened, his jaw hard. Then he said, "If peace is even a sliver of possibility, I want it rooted in something more than numbers. Let them see. Let them all see. Kincaid tried one last time, Admiral. They'll think you've gone soft." He looked at the hatchlings sleeping in their makeshift nest, their small chests rising and falling. "I've been hard long enough. Hardness has burned half the stars between us. It's time someone tried softness." The bridge went quiet. No one argued further. Rival when the Resolute docked with the Vigilant horizon. The hatchlings came with him, swaddled in blankets stitched by nervous engineers. They chirped and wriggled, utterly unaware that they were about to step into a hall where the fate of two civilizations trembled. And so, when the summit doors opened and Admiral Elias Rourke entered, he did not carry only the weight of fleets and strategies. He carried lives that should never have been caught in a war and fed them with his own hands. Before the stunned eyes of enemies and allies alike, the War Council froze, not because of strategy or weapons, but because of something far more disarming: the sight of an enemy admiral bottle feeding their children during a ceasefire. The chamber's air was so still it seemed filtered twice over. Neutrality drones hovered in the corners, their sensors drinking in every tremor of movement, every fluctuation in heart rate. The table stretched between Terran and Carvic delegations, wide enough to keep swords from crossing, narrow enough to force the smell of sweat and tension across its surface. And there, at its center, Admiral Elias Rourke fed enemy hatchlings. The sight fractured the silence. You could hear the shift of uniforms, the creak of armor plates, the low hum of translators sensing across dialects. Yet not a single soul spoke until the High Strategos himself moved forward, his obsidian armor whispering like boulders grinding. "You dare insult us," Orcs rumbled, his voice carrying the timber of stone cracking under pressure. To parade prey before the council chamber? To flaunt their helplessness while their kin lie in graves you dug? The hatchling at Rourke's chest squirmed, oblivious to the rage radiating through the chamber. The Admiral adjusted the bottle's angle, calm as if seated in a nursery rather than a war summit. His eyes met Orcs's. "They're not prey," Rourke said softly, words cutting sharper than any blade. "They're your children, and mine, in the ways that matter. I will not apologize for keeping them alive." The words hung, heavy as lead. The first cracks Terran delegation shifted uncomfortably. Councillor Tinnabu's face tightened into its usual mask of disapproval, but her fingers tapped restlessly against the table, betraying nerves. Admiral Hisong, ever patient and calculating, narrowed his eyes not in condemnation, but in scrutiny, as if weighing whether compassion might itself be a form of strategy. The Carvic generals were less subtle. One snarled, mandibles clicking, the sound echoing like knives sharpening. Another's crest spines flared in open outrage. Yet among them stood General Yorath, the elder, her ceremonial armor dulled with age. Her eyes lingered not on Rourke, but on the hatchlings. When one let out a thin, reedy cry, her composure cracked for an instant. Her throat released a keening note, raw and primal, a sound of mourning recognized across species. Rourke saw it, filed it away. There was no weapon like memory. Fear of weakness. Kincaid and Niam stood behind their admiral, tense as tripwires. They scanned the room, cataloging threats, waiting for a blade, a claw, or even a word sharp enough to spill blood. "This is dangerous," Niam murmured under her breath. "Not as dangerous as pretending we've never buried our own children," Rourke replied without turning. Orcs's crest spines shifted. "Do you think such theatrics will erase your record, grave builder? Your fleets burned our nurseries at Te-Recheval. Your siege at Vera starved hatchlings by the thousand. And now you feed a handful and call yourself merciful?" Rourke did not flinch. "I don't call myself anything, but I know what I see when I look at them. Life, that's all. If you want to kill me for holding them, then kill me. But understand this, I'll die feeding your children." The council chamber seemed to shrink under the weight of the words. Even the drones, programmed for neutrality, dimmed their vocal hums as if unwilling to intrude. Whispers among allies and enemyist Terran officers behind the council exchanged furtive glances. Some looked appalled, convinced their admiral had sabotaged negotiations before they began. Others, especially the younger officers hardened by years of endless skirmishes, found their eyes softening at the sight of the hatchlings. They remembered siblings, cousins, children left behind on colonies turned to ash. They wondered silently, guiltily, if an enemy might once have held them the same way. Across the table, the Karvik generals whispered in their guttural tongue. Snatches of words filtered through translator nodes: weakness, manipulation, impossible, kinship. For all their attempts at unity, the image unsettled them, shook the bedrock of their doctrine that Terrans were butchers without souls. The elders stepped forward. General Urat H. moved. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped out from the Karvik honor guard. Her armor joints groaned, the sound of years pressed into metal. She looked at Rourke not with hatred, but with the aching recognition of one who had seen too much loss. Her voice rasped. The smallest one. Her markings. She was of the brood ship Haven of Spines. That vessel was destroyed on the retreat from Vera. My niece was aboard. The chamber went still. The hatchling in Rourke's arms chirped, nuzzling against the bottle. Yorith's hands trembled, the only betrayal of emotion in a lifetime of war discipline. Rourke lowered his gaze to the infant, then back to her. Then she is your blood, and she has lived, despite everything. Would you deny her because my arms held her first? Yorith's jaw tightened. The other generals looked at her with alarm. Her words, her choice, could fracture their united front. Masks shattered for the first time in 7 years of conflict. Silence carried something other than hostility. It carried possibility. Arksith's spines lowered fractionally. Councillor Tinabu's tapping fingers stopped. The War Council, so practiced in speeches and threats, so rehearsed in scripts of dominance and retaliation, found themselves robbed of language. Not by fleets, not by strategy, not by firepower. By the sight of a scarred human admiral, bottle feeding the children of his enemies with the same gentleness he might have given his own. The War Council froze, and in that frozen stillness, the masks each side had worn for years of hatred, of superiority, of righteousness began, however faintly, to crack. Asterisk. The summit adjourned in uneasy silence. No agreements signed, no borders redrawn. The official records would later describe the session as preliminary, inconclusive, non-binding. But every soul present knew that what had transpired was not inconclusive, it was unforgettable. The image of Admiral Elias Rourke cradling enemy hatchlings had already imprinted itself in the memory of both delegations. For warriors and politicians who had measured their lives in tonnage destroyed, it was a moment disarmingly small, almost laughably ordinary. Yet it lingered like the aftertaste of lightning. The walk back escorted by Marines. Rourke carried the hatchlings out of the council chamber. Their tiny breaths brushed against his collarbone. Kincaid fell in step, her voice taut with nerves. Sir, you realize half the delegation now thinks you've lost your mind. Then let them, Rourke said. Niam's jaw flexed. And the other half? They think you staged it. That this is theater, a new kind of psychological weapon. Rourke adjusted the blanket, settling the youngest hatchling more securely. Maybe it is theater. But if so, it's the first play worth watching in this war. Neither officer argued further. They followed him through the station's corridors, watched by neutral drones and hushed station staff. A few of the staff risked brief smiles at the sight of the bundled hatchlings, small cracks in the facade of impartiality, ripples among alleys back aboard the Resolute. The mood was complicated. Crew members greeted the returning admiral with stiff salutes, but their eyes lingered on the blanket. Some glowed with pride, others with suspicion. In the mess hall that evening, whispers flowed like contraband liquor. He's gone soft. No, he's braver than all of us. Who else could have done that in front of the Karvik? It'll make us look weak. They'll strike harder next time, or maybe it'll make them hesitate. By the time the night shift rotated in, the story had already fractured into myths. Some swore the hatchlings had reached out to the Karvik general, touching her hand. Others claimed the strategos himself had bowed his head. None of it was true, but all of it carried power, ripples among enemies in the Karvik flagship. Similar debates raged. Reports from the summit spread through the ranks faster than official channels could control. Warriors muttered in low tones. The human held them like kin. Some spat in disgust, calling it manipulation. Others, veterans, who had lost their own broods, fell silent in dangerous contemplation. General Yuroth, alone in her quarters, reviewed the holo captures again and again. The sight of the hatchlings' markings the same as her niece's line gnawed at her. Like an old wound reopened, she poured a ration of fermented resin and left it untouched, staring instead at the projection of the human Admiral. Why did he choose life, when so often he chose death? Her claws flexed. She could not answer. A conversation at the nursery later that cycle. Rourke stood in the ship's improvised nursery. The hatchlings lay nestled in their foam nests, their breathing soft and rhythmic. Hisong joined him, moving with the measured pace of a man who thought before every footstep. "You risked everything today," Hisong said without preamble. "Not everything," Rourke replied. He adjusted the humidity regulator, watching condensation bead along the curved walls. "Just my reputation. That's already half ruined." The older Admiral studied him. "Reputations can be rebuilt. But symbols endure. You've become one, whether you intended to or not." Rourke exhaled slowly. "If I must be a symbol, let it be for something other than fire and ash." Hisong folded his hands behind his back. "Careful, Elias. The galaxy doesn't forgive idealists." Rourke looked down at the sleeping hatchlings. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe it only needs to remember that idealism existed at all. The shift in the stars over the next weeks, the ceasefire held not perfectly, but longer than most had predicted. Border skirmishes quieted. Patrol reports came back with fewer casualty lists. Neither side admitted it openly, but hesitation had crept into their orders. Warriors and captains, once eager to prove their loyalty with blood, now found themselves haunted by the image of children suckling at the hands of the enemy. Even propaganda faltered. Terran broadcasts meant to demonize the Karvik drew derision. But what about the hatchlings? Karvik rhetoric calling Terrans soulless killers met the same response. Then why did their Admiral feed our young? The war machine was too massive to stop overnight, but its gears slowed, just perceptibly. Enough that diplomats whispered of possibilities where only annihilation had existed before. A moment Alonioni evening, when the ship sailed through the quiet shadow of a gas giant, Rourke sat alone in the nursery. The hatchlings stirred, their tiny claws scratching softly against cloth. He fed them one by one, humming an old Terran lullaby his mother had sung when Earth itself had seemed on the brink of collapse. The stars wheeled outside, indifferent and eternal. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Peace doesn't come with treaties. It comes with hands holding something fragile and deciding not to let go." The smallest hatchling cooed, a sound like rain on glass. Rourke smiled, weary but genuine. Seeds of Tomorrow's story would not record this night. The official reports would list fuel consumption, patrol schedules, supply shortages. The council minutes would remain sterile, noting only discussion adjourned. But across both fleets, in barracks and mess halls, in the quiet hours when warriors stared into recycled air and wondered why they still fought, a story took root. How Admiral Rourke, humanity's iron tactician, once bottle-fed enemy hatchlings during a ceasefire. A story that whispered of something other than war, a story that planted seeds. And though it would take years, perhaps decades, those seeds would grow.